Yo, what's going on? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another story mix. As you can see, it's on psychedelic research chemicals. If you aren't aware, new chemicals are being designed all the time, and among these include psychedelic alternatives, many of which can land in a legal gray area. But here with these trips, we see how they compare to traditional psychedelics, and also how they are unique. Let me know what other kind of mixes you guys want to see, and I do want to know these videos are from back in the day, so my delivery and the quality will vary. But we're keeping it that way for authenticity. So if you want to see more of these, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. So without further ado, let's dive right into this. Roaming free, unearth and heal. Introduction, set and setting. This was my first psychedelic experience in a long while. I believe it has been almost a year since I've actually tripped, full blown, alone. I have several experiences with 4-HO-MIPT already under my belt. The compound has proven itself to be a short-acting one, and this, coupled with its fame as a fairly easy substance to handle, made it my first choice for this foray into the psychedelic realm after such a break. Though I had been thinking about tripping for a while, I believe it was the sorrowful death of Sasha Shulgin that sealed the deal. It was about time. But I didn't feel like tripping at all. I almost never do, and I never have done. I abuse drugs. My drug use is problematic. This much is certain. I partake in dissociatives with gusto. I enjoy smoking cannabis, although my appetite for this is much lesser than towards dissociatives, and for the last year or so, I've become increasingly mesmerized by the disgusting depths of the artificial, self-wrapping warmth of opioids, and the risk-free ego-boosting euphoria of GHB, GBL, and other GABA activists. My appetite for psychoactive substances is grand, but what started it all, the only class of drugs that actually has tremendous worth for psychological reputation and growth, serotonic psychedelics, have been almost forgotten on the to-be-used one-day shelf. I always forgot their worth, even after closing in on 5 years of experience and half 100 trips. So it was after a day of meditation and connecting with myself outdoors, a day of sunshine travels on foot, both amongst others and alone in the memory-filled woods of my youth, that I decided that this was going to be the day. I had waited long enough, and though I was terrified and had scarce an idea of how exactly this substance might help me, at 23:47, I weighed an amount of 22 milligrams and dosed it orally. The free roaming psyche. I had done this before, many times before, though I didn't clearly recall what was coming, and the months and months of no psychedelic experience had managed to twist my memory into untrue theory. I knew for sure that I had done it before, whatever it was, and had survived. What was the fear composed of? What did I fear in the experience? I feared that there was something in me which was only waiting to be tickled, to be poked, and that would spring up in an aggression as a result and overtake me. I was uncertain, but I had managed to reduce my anxiety for the most part. The day had been good, and I felt myself strongly. I felt ready for this holiness. At 10 minutes in, I was already starting to feel the effects. A muscular relaxation and an unwillingness to keep my posture upright, and the slightest movement in my scalp was already becoming manifested. Contrast was becoming alive. I went to the bathroom for the last time before giving myself up to the incoming intensities, fetched a glass of water, and retired, as is always the ritual, to my bed with my headphones. I put on some positive music, though I was somewhat in a contradictory mood as to whether or not this was smart. I feared once again that this attempt to keep my spirits up would provoke something evil in me, something nasty. But this was not the case, regardless of the momentary uncertainty. For if something has been left in me after my years of intermediate experience with psychedelic drugs, it is my theory of mind, my theory of what tripping is about, and my ability to recognize the situation for what it is and what it has always been. The free-roaming psyche, Huxley's mind at large. When faced with the situation, I intuitively know how to trip and do not get tangled in myself in the same way I did when I was in experience. The sharpest come up was from approximately 20 minutes in to 45 minutes in, and during this time the unbelievably tight latex Nazi uniform, which I would probably identify with what is often in the literature of the field called the ego, and solely with the constraints of which I allow myself normally to live in, was blissfully dissolving. Almost immediately, I realized that there was no external entities here, at least not in this space, and there were no parts of me truly unknown to myself. There was just me, this mental creature with its innumerable tentacle-like appendages, my emotions, and my thoughts. These psychological parts of mine were given their deserved freedom, and they played with each other, tickled each other, and though they are all part of me as I am, the true I, the creature, they worked in partial anatomy from each other, much like the tentacles of an octopus. Very soon, I was mostly content. I knew myself, and I knew I was good. In my heart, I have always known I am good. The little boy that tries to be nice to everyone, tries his best to be a good person, tries to be a blessing upon the world and a boon to each and every one. I knew I loved myself, though in the fold of this love there were streaks of hate as well and self-disgust, streaks that were severe, but which I have in my previous psychedelic experience seen time and time again to be of no threat to myself as a whole. I am wounded, but not evil. Though the peak of the experience was unfortunately short, I used it for whatever healing I could. In my latex straitjacket of a Nazi uniform, I never allow myself to look at my wounds, and that is how the human being works. One is wounded when one is young or older, and one is incapable of immediately healing the wound, so no one locks it away because it hurts so much or disgusts one so much. Only through the aid of someone else via very close friends or prolonged therapy or psychoanalysis, or as the free-roaming psyche, can a person muster the courage to uncover the lid of whatever is haunting them. Like a corpse fermented in the sun. In attempting this healing work, I extended my appendages towards my liver. Ever since I was young, I have been easily hypochondriac about my liver. I hate eating liver, it makes me sick. I easily get pains in the area, and talk of the liver makes me uncomfortable. The decision to explore the area was straightforwardly intuitive, and these links to the area and my psychological behavior were only made later. I don't need memory to know where I hurt. I only need to face the pain and allow myself to recognize it. So I zoomed in on this area and became clear to me, as it has on previous trips I've merely forgotten, that the body image of the person is wholly a part of his psyche. The body is thoroughly psychological. Psychedelics are indeed, as I believe Stanislav Grof has often said, a microscope to the psyche. The painful area near my liver, which normally encompasses only an area perhaps a bit larger than my thumb on my everyday level of magnification, an overview perspective one can say, became the size of half my torso. As I zoomed in on the area and extended my mental appendages towards it, I came upon the wound and I instantly retreated in horror. I touched the wound and it was disgusting, it was repulsive, and it hurt. While the healthy areas of my psyche are composed mainly of the prismatic colors of red, green, blue, and yellow, the wound was a grayish brown. It didn't react to being touched, and it actually felt as if it was dead. I had the strong association that it was a slimily, sun-fermented corpse, and that my thought appendages were like disturbed vultures uncertainly picking on the unresponsive meat. I feared this area, this wound, immensely, but after a moment's recuperation, I decided to head again towards the cursed area and find the source of this age-old pain. My appendages explored their way between some large and very unresponsive and psychologically inert or slumbering fibers, which I believe were the bones of my ribcage, searching for the frightening lesion, and on my way managed to fix some smaller faults, micro cramps in the muscles, tweaking things here and there, but as I neared once again on the wound, I couldn't go further. It felt too uncomfortable, and a tremendous disgust was once again overtaking me. I retreated, and when I attempted a foray into the territory again, a half an hour or so later, the psychedelic effects were already too much lessened. I failed to discover my wound. But what is certain is that I have hidden something secret near my liver when I was little, under my ribcage on the right side, something secret and disgusting, something I believe I am very much ashamed of, something dead to the rest of me, a part of my excommunicated from the community of my psyche for some unspeakable crime that long ago had been deemed unsuitable for the light of day. Though this major wound has troubled me in the form of hypochondria and repulsive associations with the liver since I have been very young was a fruitful find, there was something else I managed to do as well. The pain of letting go. I have always been very poor at letting go of things emotionally, be they memories, old friends, habits, or objects. Since I was young, I felt this to be the one of the most striking components of my psychological makeup, and when I was more untroubled as a teenager, I even called the excessive heartache I felt towards the older, now lost, iterations of myself I meet in my memories, my sickness. I have always feared that letting go of something means never getting it back, the irreversible buying of a loved one, a friend. During this experience, I found, to the right of my abdominal muscles very low in my torso, that I was clutching some things, like rocks or boulders, the nature of which was unclear to me. They were obstructing my breathing, very concretely, and most of them felt like unvoiced cries of pain and frustration. It is incredibly hard to be a proper, considerate, and self-improving human being, and I have never learned to allow myself to complain. Many were small enough and not very were dear to me, and I was happy to let go of them immediately, and they tumbled down into the void. I felt my breathing deepen and become more easy. But some of them I clutched very tightly and hadn't let them go. I was perplexed for a moment at my inability to loosen my grasp on whatever they were I was holding on to. After a moment, I realized that these final objects were truly quite dear to me, though they were weighing me down and obstructing my breath, and so I changed tactics. I began to soothe these clutching appendages of mine. I told them that everything was alright, that sometimes one just has to let go of something very dear, that one can't hold on to everything forever, and through this tactic, I began to feel immense sorrow, a momental sadness, and while one part of myself was attempting to soothe another to let go, the clutching part of me was in mourning. No, these are mine. Don't take them from me. No, please, no. And finally, with a little cry of lamenting agony from my whole being, I let go of these objects, and I released my clutch, watching in grief as they, too, tumbled down into the immeasurable void. Immediately, I began to breathe more freely. The noise from my cry was enough to alarm my roommate, who was listening to music in the neighboring room, unknowing of the fact that I was going through a psychedelic experience. He appeared at my door, and I informed him of this, and that I was fine and nothing was wrong. He told me that if I wanted to talk about what I was going through, he was available, and promptly left the room. The trip was nearing a close. The time was about an hour and 50 minutes in, and the plateau of the experience was already over. Fairly soon after the episode with my roommate, I joined him in our common room and decided to spend whatever time I had left to enjoy his company without being chained within myself in the overtight straitjacket of my ordinary consciousness. We headed to bed around 4 hours in, and I fell asleep quickly and easily. Now, post-experience. I soon felt that I couldn't have let go of whatever I was clutching near my abdomen, all that completely without knowing what it was I was letting go of. I had the feeling that I fetched the dear objects back while I was looking. I wasn't sure of this, but I did feel skeptical about whether anything like this can be truly solved or healed without knowledge of what it is about. And my breathing seems still to be burdened, but I gained first an inkling as to the burden's nature, and then a stronger suspicion. There is something which has been taken from me when I have been very young. Some circumstance or other has forced me to relinquish something I held very dear to me, something I wouldn't have wanted to let go of for any price, but which was still taken from me. This precious something has haunted me and still haunts me ever since. Even though whether it was that what was taken from me gone or not, perhaps it was returned and I didn't realize it was the same for a long, long time, psychologically I still clutch onto it tight as ever. What could this be? What were those things of my very own, eternally my own, tumbling down into the void below? I had no significant ideas about the matter until the next evening. I was reading a prior version of the same text and suddenly was struck by the numerous similarities of my experience to a bowel movement. Though there are still some doubts about this, the solution felt correct at once. Even though it is difficult to understand from my adult perspective, the postpartum period of a very young child following discharge of fecal matter is psychologically very complex. First of all, it is very difficult for a child to distinguish feces from other parts of herself, since it originates within herself and is made by herself. I have always suffered from occasional constipation, and I'm fairly needy when it comes to toilet behavior by requiring a familiar place and a familiar time for the operation. I am therefore suggested the following. At one point or another, when I was little, I decided to retain my feces despite increasing abdominal discomfort, keep my little creations for myself, but that as that pain grew, so grew the realization, and perhaps the prompting of a parent, that I had to let go, and finally so I did, but with regret, and ever since I've carried phantom feces with me, laminated similarly to a phantom limb, still constricting my breath and burning my innards, and I repress bitterness, and I am still extremely picky about when and where to release. Time will show whether this symptomatology will now lessen its grip in turn. Afterward, in conclusion, the trip revealed to me paths towards healing that were not known to me before. It revealed wounds I have carried with myself forever, and I am most fortunate to have the traditional and long process of psychoanalysis underway for myself at this very moment. A platform where these revelations can be taken further and handled thoroughly. This will sooner or later result in a betterment in my symptomatology, but it will need time. And on this, I give my final few remarks. Though I appreciate the psychoanalytical process tremendously and have very well felt its healing powers, it is simultaneously once again clear to me that this valuable process would gain so very much from the use of psychedelic agents. Indeed, I feel a single prolonged trip with my analyst would gain me more than months, or even years, of ordinary analytical work. For far too long, I have allowed uncertainty in this regard to enter into discussion, whereas I should stand by what I know to be true and right with pride. I am angry at myself for my weakness and timidity, but I am still growing, as we all are. In the end, I am still very young, and though I may be angry at myself, or I have self-disgust in me, and though I am wounded, I am still, at this moment, most of all grateful to my experience for braving the psychedelic experience once again, and witnessing its healing potential so directly. It gives me hope that with concurrent analytical and psychedelic work, I might manage to uncover what lies under my ribcage as well, near the liver, and perhaps finally, by way of this healing, manage to pry open the constraining shell I have psychologically forced myself to inhabit and give myself freedom. After taking a year hiatus, I decided to write this trip report after taking 5-MeO DIPT for the first time in a year. Actually, this was the first psychedelic experience of any kind I have had in a year. Long-term background. Before taking a year off from psychedelics, I was quite active in using psychedelics, often for a period of around 3 years. In this time, I used LSD often, MDMA around 10 times, psilocybin mushrooms around 5 times, AMT around 6 times, amanita mushrooms around 5 times, 2CT7 around 10 times, and 5-MeO DIPT more times than I can count, probably over 100. Short-term background. The experience in question occurred on July 4th. It was a lazy weekend day. All day was spent resting and lounging around the house smoking on very good marijuana. A light pork dinner was eaten around 5:30 p.m. No other chemicals were taken. No cold medicine, vitamins, or other farms. 7 p.m. A light dose, 8 milligrams, of 5-MeO DIPT was taken. 5-MeO DIPT was measured using a small cuticle pusher, a fingernail tool, that had been calibrated on a very accurate digital scale the year prior using the same batch of 5-MeO DIPT. The dose was swallowed in a gel cap. I was a little worried that the powder had become compressed and thus more dense while in storage. This, along with the possibility of being in public, helped me decide to go with a light dose of 5-MeO DIPT. 7:30 p.m. Effects of 5-MeO DIPT are noticed. The eye sockets and front part of the head can definitely feel the tryptamine buzz. I started drinking lots of water to keep myself properly hydrated. Body starts having warm/cold episodes. To combat this, the air is turned on colder and I put on a sweatshirt. I start sweating greatly. More marijuana is smoked. 8 p.m. Smoke more marijuana and drink more water. This helped lessen any body load that was experienced. State of mind had progressed to a +2 on the Shogun scale. Visuals are non-existent, but mood is very upbeat. Perma-smile has started. 8:30 p.m. Leave the drive downtown to see the fireworks display with my fiancée. She is not on any psychedelic, just marijuana and wine. Since she has drunk some wine, I decided to drive. Maybe not the smartest thing to do, but I have ample experience driving while on 5-MeO DIPT, and the checkpoints out around town will be harder on alcohol breath than they will with my dilated pupils. 9 p.m. Arrive downtown safely. I am enjoying the fact that I have a definite buzz going on. My head is clear and happy, and there's no body load to speak of. The lack of open eye visuals is expected because of the low dose. Usually it takes around 20 milligrams for me to produce profound open eye visuals. Nonetheless, conversation with fiancé is easy and fun. Not too deep, but I'm not a blundering idiot either. 9:45 p.m. Fireworks show starts. Maybe more impressing to me than the visual aspect of the fireworks was the sonic booms that I felt during each big explosion. It was quite amazing feeling the shockwave speed past me. Mood has progressed to even more content and happy feelings. 10:30 p.m. Fireworks show is finished. I am more than pleased with how well the low dose of 5-MeO DIPT has fared with me. I feel great, I feel content, I feel happy, and I'm glad that I do not have the urge for a more intense experience. I have had too many trips where I think I need to take a supplement dose to increase the length or intensity of the trip. 11 p.m. Get home and smoke more marijuana, then get a bite to eat. After the fiancé falls asleep, I put on some 1969 Grateful Dead and lay down on the couch. I close my eyes, relax, and start focusing in on the music. This is one of my favorite times on 5-MeO DIPT, just relaxing and seeing where the music takes me in my mind. This usually creates great closed-eye visuals for me, but this time the closed-eye visuals were limited. Still, the music seemed to come alive in my head, especially the guitar work of Garcia on Darkstar. It is as if I can hear a conversation with Garcia playing. Day after, I woke up feeling great and refreshed. No hangover, no headache, just good vibes and a renewed outlook on life. Conclusions. This trip turned out to meet and beat my expectations. The low dose of 5-MeO-DIPT seems to be better for any type of public interaction. It keeps the body load to a minimum and lets the mind still carry on conversations. The downside is the lack of visuals, both open eye and closed eye. So here's what I learned from 5-MeO-DIPT. Don't take too much trying to get 5-MeO-DIPT to be like LSD. It isn't. Don't think that 5-MeO-DIPT will take you places without any effort on the user's part. 5-MeO-DIPT has a lot to offer, but it will only go somewhere with a little push and assistance by the user. Don't snort 5-MeO-DIPT. Keep the body hydrated. This will do wonders for curbing the headache during and after the trip. Don't mix any other psychedelics with it. The dose-response curve is too steep to chance the interaction with some other tryptamine or phenethylamine. One final thought. I have had plenty experience with sharing 5-MeO-DIPT with others, before it was illegal of course. I have found that males tend to have more common experiences and effects, both body and mind, with 5-MeO-DIPT. This is in contrast to the vastly different experiences that female users have had. These range from feeling nothing, the most common effect, to being overwhelmed to a point that all vision is blurred into non-existent shapes and colors, to having a 3-hour delay of effects after dosing, to having menstruation start the next day. This has happened even when the female was in mid-cycle, having 2 weeks until bleeding should start. I'm very interested in hearing more from female users of 5-MeO-DIPT and other tryptamines on the effects the drugs have on the menstruation cycle. Beyond my high expectations. Alright guys and gals, I think DOC really is the shit. I also think LSD really is the shit. Until I tried DOC, even though I tried a couple dozen or so other psychedelic drugs, I thought LSD really where it was at. Not to say I haven't had absolutely amazing experiences on others. I happen to really like mushrooms, 4-ACO, MIPT, 2CC, mescaline, and a few others quite a bit as well. But it seems clear to me that some psychedelics are much more deep, relevant, and real than others. I won't even go into DMT and salvia because those two are just nuts. These two substances have led me to come to the strange conclusions regarding time, space, and the human form. Back to my point, some psychedelics primarily act as an eye candy with a strange, sometimes good buzz. They might enhance your sense of humor, cause you to act out of normal fashion, or even give you an occasional insight or revelation. Then there are straight up entheogens. These drugs allow you to achieve a deeply spiritual mindset and state of consciousness. Your ego, first your surroundings, then your internal dialogue, then any sense of who you were disappears, followed by a complete sense of who you really are. Maybe you will meet God, maybe your concept of God will completely change to encompass the entire universe and your universal self included. Mescaline in mushrooms and fat doses of LSD fit into this category. LSD is unique though, because everything is so close to you. You don't really expand outward, do you? This is a real question and I'd like to hear if anyone disagrees, but I think LSD does not cause true ego loss. It's more like everything else comes to you and becomes one with you, but you are still you. Just a super smart, super enlightened, super sense of perspective you. But hey, my highest dose of LSD was only like 600 UGs. Maybe it takes more. Anyway, I doubt I'll ever dose that much LSD again. I doubt taking a higher dose is the answer. So, in LSD, you can be surrounded by an electric candy land, have interpretive problems like thinking it's been 8 hours when it's only been 2, etc. You may even consciously expand outward, but your heart chakra is still the center of it. My point is that DOC is the same way. Now, let's get technical for a moment. I'm sure a lot of you guys are super anxious to hear the details. 6 p.m. I ate 2 milligrams DOC, plus or minus a fraction of a milligram. My buddy ate the same dose. It tasted like maple sugar candy made from fine Vermont grade A light amber maple syrup, tapped from a 120-year-old sugar maple right after a few warm days have caused much of the snow to melt. Sprinkled on some French toast and served with eggnog and brandy, of course. 6:20 p.m. I can feel something. Kinda feels like I might be coming up slightly on some very, very clean LSD. 6:40 p.m. Definitely feeling it. I can still talk and act normally, but I am moderately high and there are mild visuals starting to form. The feeling feels like LSD but mellower and less jittery. There is no anxiety. The visuals look like LSD, but, well, it's hard to tell at this point. 7:30 p.m. There's no doubt that by now we are both definitely tripping. The body feeling is simply great. It's like the electric fry feeling of LSD, where you can feel the energy flowing throughout your body. Except with LSD, this often makes me want to squirm around a bit and not be able to completely relax unless I try to meditate or really focus that energy. With DOC, I was easily able to relax, and it was more like I was basking in this energy rather than being plugged in to a two-prong outlet. By now, it was clear that DOC is visually one of the best drugs you can take. It wasn't the sheer intensity, although I was still coming up, but the beauty of pretty much everything. Objects appeared brighter, crisper, more detailed, extra dimensional. A lot like LSD, but I did not notice the same kind of neon aura that tends to form the border of objects in my vision with LSD. But that is a very minor difference that I bet very few would notice. 8 p.m. Time dilation is already occurring. Both myself and my friend are surprised to learn it's only been 2 hours since we ate our doses. We spent some time playing Tekken 5 because that game kicks ass, but I think we were done playing video games by this point. I still feel like I'm coming up, or at least I've come up all the way, but that the drug still had a few things up its sleeve to show me, and I knew it did because it's only been 2 hours. Back on the topic of visuals, now the rug was squirming around a bit. Looked like LSD, but with a little more gleam to it. Solid surfaces like parts of my wall or the ceiling were shifting color and hue, though not in any extreme way, and light patterns were forming over it. My tapestries were actually the least interesting things to look at. There were tracers following moving things, like my hand in front of my face, but nothing extremely long. Visually, mentally, and physically, I felt like I had taken 90 UG of exceptionally clean LSD that you only come across in a lifetime. Not that 90 UG of LSD makes me very jittery or anxious, though sometimes it can, but this had even less of those characteristics. If I closed my eyes, I saw transparent swirls, patterns, and images. It was quite diverse and beautiful, and again reminded me of LSD more than anything. 10 p.m. By now, we had both come up a little bit more, but just a little, like 10 UG more LSD. Visually, the entire room was alive, not doing anything too crazy, but if I focused on one object, the rest of the room would gradually morph. Patterns were more developed and closed-eye visuals were a bit brighter. I was also a little higher and starting to feel some of the stimulation reminiscent of LSD, but still milder, start to kick in. At this point, my friend was convinced to go hang out with some other kids for a little while. I decided to stay at my residence and take advantage of this time alone to explore DOC more in depth. 12:30 a.m. Wow, I just played guitar for the last 2.5 hours at max intensity. This is simply the best drug I have ever taken for music enhancement. Not only does music sound absolutely awesome and complex, kinda like LSD but better, but I just played the sickest guitar I ever played. I'm a pretty good guitar player to begin with, but this was amazing. Amphetamines are good for playing guitar because they let me play faster and more accurately. LSD is good for playing guitar because it allows me to think of totally new things to play and to play with greatly enhanced feeling. Well, DOC was a super combination of both these, but better. I felt totally relaxed playing my guitar. At times I realized I wasn't even thinking at all, yet I was in the middle of creating the most beautiful music. How could this be? To be playing so well without even trying? With this boundary to my playing removed, I could do anything. I could go on and on about this, but long story short, after I finally put that guitar down, I felt like $1,000,000,000, and I hadn't started to come down at all. I was hungry, so I ate a 3 Musketeer bar. It was good. Then I smoked a bowl, more like 2 hits from the bowl. I didn't really feel like I got stoned, but it made me trip more, mentally and visually, pretty much like LSD. 2 a.m. By this time, my buddy had come back and we chilled out drinking a few beers, smoking the occasional bowl, and playing music. Music was key. I kept wishing I was at a concert because I would have totally been raging out front row. I can't wait for festival season. This would be the drug to take at a festival. I would eat it and then eat more, and then eat more, and then go home. The DOC agreed just fine with the beer, by the way. They mix similarly to LSD and alcohol as I expected. I only had like 3 beers over the course of 3 hours though. 4 a.m. No change. It's hard to tell if we started to come down yet because we keep smoking weed, but I don't think the DOC has started to wear off yet. My buddy and I spent some time chilling in my room, having strange and hilarious conversations, but without the tension and confusion of LSD, which tends to occur around this point. I was still in an electric candy land. Much of our conversation revolved around the fact of how dank DOC is. 6 a.m. Starting to come down a little. We spent some time playing Tekken and watching some VH1 music videos, which were pretty hilarious at the time. 6:30 a.m. Took some Xanax, 2 to 4 milligrams I guess. 7 a.m. Still have some visuals and feel like I might be tripping if it wasn't for the Xanax, but the Xanax easily beat out what little stimulation the DOC had, and I crashed easily. The next day. 4:40 p.m. Sweet, I got a lot of sleep. My buddy woke up about the same time and sent me a text, and we decided to go get Taco Bell. The drive there was pretty fantastic. I had a great afterglow, and the sunset looked amazing. It was also the first day the sun had shone through the clouds in like 2 weeks of nasty weather. I would say the DOC afterglow is much like the afterglow of a fantastic LSD trip. So, DOC is the shit. It clearly lasts a little bit longer than LSD, but not by much. It is in fact so similar to LSD, or should I say really good LSD, that I suggest to anyone putting DOB, DOI, Bromo-Dragonfly on blotter to use DOC instead, because I would not be pissed off at all to get DOC on a blotter if I thought I was getting LSD. I probably would just think it was some excellent LSD. Not that I think you should misrepresent things as LSD, but man, it is impossible not to compare DOC to LSD because of their many, many similarities. Except at this point, I think I'd rather take DOC. Hope this report does this substance justice. It has a lot to offer. Several days prior, I acquired 1 vial of Bromo-Dragonfly, which was diluted in ethanol, ETHEREUM. The source was a friend of a close friend, a university student from San Diego, who was very well versed on RCs. He explained how he purchased the chemical, which he had previously purchased the same amount from the same distributor and diluted it the same way as which I was buying. He claimed the dose would measure roughly 75 units of measurement per drop of liquid. He also said that he knew about the 2 separate batches of Bromo-Dragonfly produced several years back, where the American batch was not as potent per weight as the European batch, but since that was several years prior, he didn't want to state which batch this was. But this batch of Bromo-Dragonfly had the R isomer, which made it potent by weight. I know what I feel is enough to be confident in the idea of the variations of phenethylamines, but I do not understand why this R isomer makes this more potent. I dropped 9 drops at 75 UGs, which I believe equals to 675 UGs at 6 p.m. I was in a social setting and wasn't expecting much for a while. My buddy dropped roughly the same amount and was drinking beer. Within an hour or two, I can definitely tell that I had taken a psychedelic. My friend redosed 5 more drops around this time. At approximately 9 p.m. I left the party. I was feeling weird, sort of speedy with some minor trippiness. I wasn't sure if it would progress. By 11 p.m., I was experiencing pretty wild visuals. It was much richer than the wonderful LSD, which I regularly consume out here on the West Coast, but I felt that there wasn't the God space, which I attain when I see visuals like that off of any other favorite psychedelic. I found the same issue when I had 2 experiences with high doses of 2CB in the past. It was visually very impressive, but the clarity of mind made me almost feel like something was missing. By 1 a.m., things are very funny. I never made it back out into the night to be social. Instead, I parked in front of the television and watched cartoons like The Simpsons, which were visually amazing and very light and funny. I keep drifting between being unsure about this chemical and finding a psychedelic sort of like a MDMA mind space. By 4 a.m., I tried to lay down, but the room was exploding with colors. It was nice to be in bed, but sleep was not going to be found. So I got comfy and observed the darkness. The visuals I can only compare to 35 milligrams of 2CB. This trip lasted a real long time. I'm typing this at 8 p.m. 26 hours after dosing, and I'm feeling somewhat back to baseline. I have not slept whatsoever, but I was able to eat a full sub sandwich around 5 p.m., which made me feel much better. It surprised me I was able to eat while tripping that hard. I tend to not like taking LSD in the daytime because I feel it's more visually rich during the nighttime, but Bromo-Dragonfly would be a great substance to take a long day in nature or possibly a musical festival. It's very, very visual. I dosed on the lower end of what my supplier recommended to begin with. This may mean that the solution is not as strong as he was expecting, or that possibly this isn't the stronger R isomer, because I would assume 675 UGs would be more potent on the dosage scale, although this was a rather visually intense trip for anyone not experienced with psychedelics. My friend had redosed at roughly 9. I was worried about this after separating due to how hard I was tripping, even though I myself didn't redose. When I spoke with him the following day at 5 p.m., I was definitely still tripping, and he said he really didn't get much out of Bromo-Dragonfly, and he dropped his doses out of the same batch and significantly dosed more. Although he was drinking a lot of beer, and also he took a very fair amount of LSD in the weeks/days prior to his Bromo-Dragonfly experience, which may have resulted in this difference in our experiences. I did, however, ingest a fair amount of LSD the evening prior, and it appeared to have little effect on my Bromo trip. I was also smoking hash oil/marijuana throughout the whole experience, which I feel helped tone down the mild to moderate jitter I was occasionally experiencing, especially when the psychedelic effects first manifested. I would definitely try this chemical again. I feel it has a lot to offer, although I also feel it should be regarded very carefully after the gnarly overdoses which have happened. I know several were due to mislabeling, which happened during fall of 2009. From what I understand, a majority of the other health issues associated with Bromo-Dragonfly have been the results of larger overdoses. Simply not measuring properly or having mislabeled chemicals was to blame for a majority of the horror stories I have read. What I didn't understand prior to consuming this chemical was that it is very closely related to the DOX substituted amphetamines. I guess Bromo-Dragonfly is more closely related to DOB than it is to the 2Cs. I hope this experience sheds some light on this somewhat unknown psychedelic. I will write another experience when I choose to experiment again with Bromo-Dragonfly.